I wouldn't do it unless it's time. Now I got two gavels that are throwing me off here. All right, we're going to call this meeting to order. We're going to start off with long-range financial planning and kick this over to Kim, or Nick, or Mike.
Start off. So tonight's the long-range financial planning. I'm just going to step through a little bit, brief. The goal of the work session, we're going to look through individual funds, the forecast, discuss challenges, opportunities, future considerations, and get into a little bit of the benefit of doing such. So again, the benefit, anticipating complications, promoting sustainability, fiscal discipline, and transparency, making sure everything's out there, works into the budget. Kim and Nick have done a wonderful job putting this together. I'm going to pass it off on them. Just one thing, keep in mind, like a capital improvement plan, the long-range plan is constantly evolving. It's fluid. So it's something that'll come back to you, over and over as things change, especially if there's a drastic change. But with that, I'm hand it off to the two presenters.
We are so excited to be here tonight to talk about long-range planning. Mike kind of talked about the why you do long-range planning. We've actually never had the opportunity to kind of cast a lens out 10 years into the future and see what our revenues and expenditures look like. Over the last several years for the budget, we have included a 5-year capital outlay as part of the budget, but we've never kind of given you the other side of that story and what do the revenues look like. And again, so we've done it over kind of a 5-year horizon, but really GFOA, which is Government Finance Officers Association, really one of their best practices is to incorporate a 10-year lens and make that part of your budgeting process. So that's something that we would like to kind of begin conversations. You're going to hear me say this several times, that this is part of a dialogue. This is a new concept for this organization to think really long-term about what do our expenditures and revenues look like so we can make wiser decisions. So we're not expecting you to make any policy decisions tonight. A lot of it is we're going to be sharing a lot of information. We understand that it's going to be a lot to take in. We are going to be kind of talking about some considerations, some challenges, some things to look at as we move forward, some opportunities that might be out there for further discussion. And again, this is just kind of the first of many. We do look to incorporate something like this in May of every year in advance of the annual budgeting process. That way you kind of get an understanding of where the revenues are looking long-term before we start looking at some short-term or 1-year expenditures with a 5-year capital outlay. So this is going to be a bit of a team approach. We invite you to ask questions. Please stop and ask us along the way. It is important to note that that these are point in time. You guys have heard us say this before, that these are point in time. This is the information that we understand now. So in typically speaking, you understand what your expenditures are further out than your revenues. So we know that some of our large drivers are people. Local government, we're people powered. Those are going up. We have some insurance considerations over the last several years. Both health and liability insurance has gone up drastically. We don't anticipate that changing, and the reason being is because items are more expensive to replace. So insurance is sharply driven off of what the cost of replacement is. So some of the numbers that Nick is going to actually walk us through all the different funds. So we've done some forecasting over several funds for you to take a look at. Please understand that we know what future expenses might look like. We do not know what future revenues might look like. The forecast that Nick used when he calculated these are our current revenue threads, meaning that we don't know what new businesses might add to our sales tax revenue in the future. We only know what we have right now. So please understand that it is a best practice to really be conservative with your revenue, really counting what you know you have, not what you think you will have in coming years. However, to really forecast your expenditures, you do know what those are, and those should be properly reflected. So I'm going to now hand it over to Nick, who's going to kind of walk us through what the different funds are telling us.
Well, good evening, everyone. As Kim said, I'm going to go through I'm going to go through the individual fund forecast that we have, and both Kim and I coordinated. I'm wearing gray because it's a little gloomy. If you just look at, for all the reasons that Kim noted, pardon me, for all the reasons that Kim noted, is we have a clear understanding of where we think expenditures will go. We also have more control over the expense side as well. So, and on the revenue side, we forecast very conservatively here, and that really is a best practice, and it allows us to look out over those 10 years and see where those potential pain points will be. So, with the general fund, and you'll see this as a theme throughout each of the individual funds. We have a fund balance goal of 50%. This is an internal fund balance goal. That would be, we want to have in the bank at least 50% of what our operating expenditures would be. So if there's a catastrophe, a federal emergency within the city, we have funds available to continue normal operations. In the general fund, that goal is 50%. Right now, at the end of this fiscal year, we're projecting we'll have at least 105%. So that is a good number. That's something that you want for all the reasons that I just mentioned. But there are a lot of cost drivers in the general.
Councilmember Saber.
What time frame do you use for that?
We look at the end of the fiscal year where we'll be.
So it's an entire year,
Yes.
not, okay, a shorter
Yeah.
period.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And, that there are, the biggest cost driver in the general fund is people. Wages and benefits are 80+% of the general fund wages because it's our main operating fund. That's where the vast majority of departments operate, including police, fire, administration. So that's always going to be the biggest cost driver for the general fund. As Kim mentioned, we also have seen pretty significant increases in our liability insurance premiums. I believe this year it ranged, we have several different policies. They ranged from 20 to 40% increases for this year. So that's something that we're continuing to keep an eye on. We do potentially have some control over those things in future years, depending on operations or efficiencies that we have. On the revenue side, as Kim also mentioned in the introduction, we don't know what all potential revenues there could be. And from my perspective, what is our new baseline? So we had the early stages of the pandemic, we lost about 3% of revenue, and that was typical for most cities. But in the last 2 years, we have grown significantly. Specifically on the sales tax side, we've seen double-digit growth in our sales tax revenue. Is that the new base? I doubt we'll see double-digit growth going forward, but is the sales tax that we've been receiving, will that be our new baseline, or will we start to see that recede? In our forecast, I'm projecting a little bit of a recession on that, and then marginal growth going forward. Again, that's the conservative nature of things. And then you'll see this as a theme for the general fund and the parks fund. Property tax pressure. So we had the vote on Proposition A last week. That passed. We have incorporated that into our property tax numbers. For the general fund, it's $34,000 hit, so $17 million in revenue annually. It's not huge, but that over time, if that we anticipate that we might continually see some of those things just come at us, so it's something that we're always thinking about. So that's the general fund. If there are any questions, I'm happy to go through those, but I've got about 5 other funds that we'll walk through tonight as well.
All right.
Okay, so next is the park fund, and again, internally, we've set a fund balance goal of 50%, and one of the things that we will come to you before the next budget year is codifying these fund balance goals. One of the reasons, again, we have the 50% goal. If we see that funds are starting to go down and get closer to that goal number, or if we're below that goal number, internally that sparks a discussion on what do we need to do to get it back or to keep it from falling further. So this is an annual discussion that we'll have with you. Right now, the 2023 projection for the Parks Fund is a 54% fund balance by the end of the year. Similar to the general fund, wages and personnel are going to be a cost driver there. Also with 2 new projects coming on board, 2 fairly significant capital projects going on board. What are the operations and maintenance of the River Forest Park and Ball Diamond 1? Right now, all capital and also some operating subsidy is covered by the gaming fund. We also fund 1 person in the Parks Fund out of the general fund. So those are our future considerations.
Councilmember Tull.
Are these projections for next year? Is Ball Diamond 1 still costing money in the next fiscal year, or are we carrying over
Yes.
debt?
Well, so the reason you see the 2023 budget and the 2023 projected so high, that is the big capital for the River Forest Park. And
So
so,
the costs associated with Baseball Diamond 1 are
yeah.
complete? There aren't additional
there-
costs for 2023, or there are additional costs for 2023?
There are some, I think, factored. I don't know if we've spent everything, but we have funds basically from the transfer from the gaming fund from before that cover that cost. So it might take a little bit out of fund balance, but those are also funds that were from the gaming transfer to it. So it's not additional strain on the Parks Fund if there are any
I
expenses.
guess what I'm
that
just
come
trying to
through.
wrap my mind around is, are these costs of things that have already been completed, or are we looking at projected costs for projects that haven't started or are currently in process, like River Forest?
For the 2023 budget, that is for future costs. That's
Okay.
including the big capital for that.
So
It also
there
includes
are future costs associated with,
construction costs that's 2023. Going forward, we do have maintenance costs factored in.
Yeah, the reason why you see those 2 graphs so large is because that reflects the capital to actually build out River Forest Park. So that's why you're seeing kind of 2 big peaks. There's one budget and one projected. There will be ongoing costs for River Forest Park, maintenance-wise, and those have been built into this projection as well.
okay, got it.
And
Councilmember Roberts.
Does this future 10-year plan factor in the local parks tax we're going to talk about tonight?
we will hit that in the next slide.
Okay.
So this is as is. This does not include the sales tax or the potential sales tax for the Parks Fund. So, I mean, you can see there's, as we get further out, we start to see expenditures eclipse revenues. Again, it's something we evaluate yearly, and we try and make sure that we don't do that. But looking at 10 years, these are the potential factors that we're looking at.
And I'm going to just quick jump in here. The revenues that you're seeing in here for the property tax, that factors in the recent Blankenship decision that hit this fund about 2 years ago, as well as the surtax. So everything that you're seeing in here is indicative of what today is, again. So when we talk about property tax pressure, specifically the Library Board and the Parks Board were hit with a decision by the courts which reduced their funding. And then the newly passed surtax will again hit those funds again.
Right, and yeah, so the property tax pressure applies even more so to the Parks Fund because it is a significant portion of their overall revenue structure. Also, on the revenue side, transfers from gaming, as I mentioned before, we do an annual subsidy there and basically cover most, if not all, of the capital costs for the Parks Fund. So, an opportunity that we'll discuss tonight, a potential to put on the ballot, is the park sales tax. So, a quarter-cent projection, and these are using numbers, I think our baseline was from a couple years ago, so this might have actually grown. We think a quarter-cent would generate about $875,000 in annual revenue. A couple things that would do that would remove the reliance on the gaming and general support. Right now, that's the gaming support is about $150,000 for the operating plus any capital needs, and the general support is the one maintenance person that is paid out of the general fund. This also adds in even a little bit more capital and maintenance costs than the previous model did to look at future considerations on facilities. We'll be doing a facilities study in the next calendar year and seeing what our facilities needs are. Parks has a relatively new building, but There will be pressure on that over time, HVAC replacements, things like that. It removes pressure from the gaming fund to support those things. And then you can see right now, looking at that paints a little bit rosier picture for the 10-year forecast with the Parks Fund. So and Kim will talk a little bit more about future considerations on those as well. I'm going to go to the Transportation Fund, which is primarily sales tax funded operation. Again, fund balance goal of 50%. Right now, our current projection that will end the year with a 90% fund balance. This is not as much of a people or employee-oriented fund. So a lot of the cost drivers are going to be, number one, the KCATA contract, and what does that look like going forward. Right now, the gaming fund does subsidize a pretty significant portion of that. And then also ongoing capital costs with our streets and any other potential future projects or what's going to be the driver there. Revenue, we have a little bit more opportunity. So again, sales tax growth, what is the base? Will that continue to be as positive as we've seen the last couple of years? And an opportunity is right now, the gaming fund does transfer quite a bit to transportation for KCATA. This forecast projects that we'll cut that in half because we have seen that fund grow a little bit more than some of the others, so we think we've got some flexibility there to relieve some pressure on the gaming fund for the transportation fund. Okay, next is the gaming fund. Here our fund balance goal is a little bit different. And you can see, looking at the 2023 budget, why that might be. Right now, we have a projection that we'll have a 324% fund balance, which jumps off the page. But as you can see in the 23 and the 25 budget, there's really just one project that's driving a lot of that, and that's the Burlington. And we'll have other projects like that too. So just making sure that we have enough capacity to tackle some pretty significant projects in the future are why we have a higher fund balance goal for the gaming fund. The cost drivers here, and we've been addressing this, transfer support for other funds. So a couple years ago, that was 75% of the expense in the gaming fund. By 2032, we project that to be about 30%. So that's primarily funding the community center, Link City, subsidies, and a couple of other funds. On the capital side, again, thinking what are some of our future capital costs? This will be a theme for the next, this and the next two funds I'll talk about is we have a facilities master plan study that's going to be in the budget. What are the needs of our facilities? We have not, to my knowledge, we have not done a deep dive into that in several years. So what are the capital costs going to be there? That's a potential strain that is not factored in to this forecast right now. And then also the big project that we'll have over the next couple of years, which we do also have some grant funding for, is the Burlington Corridor project. So again, on the revenue side, the biggest factor is we get two main sources of funding from the Riverboat Casino, admissions, and then we get a portion of the revenue from there. And the revenue side has been fairly steady outside of the 2020 when we had, they were shut down for a couple of months. But even before the pandemic, we were seeing some declines on the admission side. So we factored that in on the revenue side, and so we anticipate that's going to be fairly level / slight decline over the next 10 years. And then in 2032, we have an annual subsidy from the Northgate TIF fund because the gaming fund put up a lot of the upfront capital for the Northgate Village. That completely drops off in 2032. So right now, that's an annual subsidy of between $900,000 and $1 million, depending on what we collect each year in TIF revenue. That will go away in 2032.
Councilmember Graves.
How often do we get updates from the casino on revenue? I'm curious if the sports gambling in Kansas is hurting us or not? How it's
Monthly.
affected revenue?
Yeah, we get that monthly, and what I've seen so far is it's been kind of a continuing trend. I'd have to look year over year, and I have that data, and I can go back and look at it. These are usually kind of some of our quieter months, and that September, October are generally some of our lower months, but that is something we've got back going several years now, looking at the month-to-month data. But I have not seen a trend go back up.
Okay. I was just curious if there's like a dip, a noticeable dip. Hopefully Missouri catches up with Kansas someday and gets it passed over here, and there's no effect on our revenue. And then the other thing I was just thinking about, another big capital expenditure just on the horizon is like the water study that we're doing right now. The water, I have no idea what the cost will be, but that's.
I'll
in the
get
near
into some
future.
of that. That is some of our concerns as well, as we have a whole lot of homework on the out that is going to be giving us 10 years' worth of capital outlay through 3 different functions as well as the facilities.
I'm just really overall just scared of relying on gaming fund for day-to-day expenses and subsidizing, Parks and Rec expenditures. I'd rather have that done through a sales tax because we do have like massive capital improvements that are going to be needed on the near future. So that's it.
And on the transfer support, what percentage are we at currently this year?
It is, oh my goodness, I was anticipating that question and then just didn't have it memorized. It is, I think, closer to
Between
about
75 and 30?
35, 40%. Again, most of the driving factor in this
Yeah.
budget is the Burlington project, which
yep.
is half, that project alone is half of the cost, half of the budget for gaming this year.
Got it, thank you.
Okay, so the next two, and we will definitely have continuing conversations on this, are the water fund and the wastewater fund. So on the water fund, we're projecting a 26% balance by the end of the year. The biggest cost driver here is going to be capital, and some of that is going to be unknown until we get that water study back, which is, that will be in the next year or so. We do have 2 pretty significant projects this year. One is the Burlington, Maine. That is being subsidized from the gaming fund, so that is included. That's a $3.5 million projected project right now. And then we've had a project for the Lime feeder system for $3.6 million. So that's why you see those revenue and expense numbers so high this year. Again, with the water study, and just more of a focus on long-range planning, we hope to really kind of solidify more of that 5 to 10-year outlook so that we can feel a little bit more positive about these numbers going forward, and we will. So on the revenue side, we're looking to just continue more of an annual discussion on the rate study versus doing it every 3 to 4 years. One, to make sure that we're not overcharging for our water rates and our sewer rates. And just to make sure that once we see those capital numbers, what are the adjustments that we need to make on our side? And when you're doing that annually and looking at it on a more regular basis, it helps with putting the best foot forward. And again, on the revenue side, the gaming subsidy, that's big in this year, but in future years, that is removed as of right now. Wastewater fund, projected have a 50% fund balance goal by the end of this year. Now this one is based on unaudited numbers, so I could see that number going down a little bit as we're working on our audit right now, and there's always some fluctuation that happens, and we see some expenses from this year get put back into the last year. So I don't know if that number is, I'm not as confident in that 50% by the end of the year. But our biggest cost drivers here are going to be capital again, and then we pay KCMO for the treatment of our sewer, so we are very dependent on them for a lot of that increase. I will say that the revenue for both the water and the wastewater fund takes into account the rate study recommendations as they are right now for the next couple of years, and then it really is very much a CPI increase that I've built in after that. So next year it's 15 and 7 for water and wastewater, and then it continues at 7% for the wastewater, and then gradually goes down to 4 and 3%. Water goes back down to 3% after the next that 15% increase. So that's why I've, pardon me, factored into the revenue for both of those funds. So that is a look at our main operating and capital funds, and then Kim is going to talk about some of the challenges that we've got.
So we kind of talked a little bit about the property tax pressures. Like I said, over the last couple of years, we have seen some recent court decisions that has reduced revenues, like I said, to the library board and the parks board. The surtax we've talked about, that's actually, there's actually two components to that. It also hit the pension, the fire and police pension fund. The city council several years ago passed a resolution that if that fund underperforms, the city would provide funding so that it performed to 100%. So it could be the chance that not only did the city lose revenue, but we will also have to supplement the police and fire pensions. So there's kind of a double component of loss on revenue for that particular cause. There's also the Hancock Amendment, which I think we have talked to you guys before, that really kind of, for property tax, it kind of governs that particular revenue source. Property tax is very stable, but incredibly slow growth. And like I said, over the last several years, we have had erosion of that particular revenue source, and I don't anticipate that stopping anytime soon. So just kind of things to think about as we talk about our revenue sources. Sales tax has grown, however, it's wildly volatile. We are heading up on the R word. I think everybody has heard the word recession several times. We don't know what that would mean for us. So we are very conservative when it comes to sales tax projections because it is really consumer-based. People may or may not feel confident, may or may not be spending, and again, that revenue is really based on people buying items or services. The cost of doing business is going up. Energy costs, insurance, both health and liability, as Nick has mentioned, our liability insurance has really gone up over the last several years. We are growing, which is a fantastic thing for a community. However, when you are a growing community, there is a increased demand for services. We are doing all of that on an aging infrastructure system. So that's some of the reasons why we are kind of doing some deep dives and better understanding of where we sit with our infrastructure. But right now, over the last several years, we have been very reactive to our infrastructure. We're hoping to be able, through this planning process, to kind of flip that and become more proactive. We do believe that that is a great long-term strategy. However, it does come with some short-term pain because, as Nick mentioned, we're using the gaming fund to kind of pay for those unforeseen items that need to be fixed immediately. I'm going to talk about some opportunity. We can be happy.
Councilmember Toll.
I have a couple questions.
Yes.
What is causing the property tax to decline? Can you explain that a little bit?
So aside from like the surtax, there are some properties that have had their valuations challenged. So that is a reduction in what their property was valued at. So remember, we receive kind of a guesstimate from, and we do our budgeting off of what the county kind of gives us as estimates. We use that as, when we plug in our budget numbers, we make some assumptions. That is what the county thinks that we'll receive in revenue. However, if you go to the board, the BOA at the state and have your valuations downturned, then we don't capture as much revenue as we had maybe initially believed we would in our budgeting process. As well as they're just, this is the first blush of a reduction in surtax. We don't know what other, there might be more of items like that.
Okay, and then my next question was the increase in insurance and liability. Is that an industry-wide increase, or is our increase above and beyond what's common right now due to use?
So we have had some instances that we believe are driving some of those costs, but really it's also part of just a national narrative. A lot of that has to do with police servicing, or police industry. There's been a lot of litigation in that world. That impacts anybody who has a police department. So there are some things that are just on a national level happening that influence our individual rates that we pay. We've also had a few items here over the last couple of years. We've had an ambulance that was totaled out. We've had a couple of trees fall in the or one tree fall in the downtown area. All of these items impact our insurance rates.
So it's a combination of both? Got it.
Yes. So we'll pivot over to opportunity. We kind of talked about the park sales tax. That would relieve a lot of pressure on the general fund as well as the capital fund. Also make it so that the Parks Department can start doing capital improvements and budgeting, having they'll be able to have a much longer lens as well. To be able to forecast and program out long-wise. They are part of our facilities, as Nick had mentioned, so that they'll get a better understanding of maybe the lifespan of their HVAC system, how much that would be, and that will allow them to long-term plan financially. We have talked about a use tax before. That is something that North Kansas City needs to put onto the ballot in order to be able to collect those revenues. What that is it applies our sales tax rate to online purchases. A lot of people consider that the mainstream or the main street, meaning that the businesses, like a brick and mortar business, is at an economic disadvantage to an online vendor right now, because an online vendor doesn't have our local sales tax applied to their purchases. So a lot of people see that as a way to make mainstream businesses a little bit more competitive by holding online and brick and mortar businesses a little bit more in line on what they're charging. Increased business and visitor activity. We have had a lot of businesses that attract a lot of outside people, making Northtown kind of a fun place to not only hang out, but hopefully live. So we have seen an increase in sales tax-based businesses. That is a good thing. There's two great things about that. One, those properties are valued at a higher rate, so you increase some property revenue off of that, as well as they collect sales tax on our behalf. So I do love it when, especially we have conferences. In fact, we have a couple of conferences going on this week. We have a lot of out-of-town visitors coming to visit our town and hopefully spending their money in our businesses. So more businesses that we can attract that do that would be advantageous to the city. Explore additional revenue sources. One of the things that is, we talked about the park sales tax. They are using 0.25%, but there's another 0.25% they could actually use for stormwater. So when we get our stormwater master plan study, one of the things that might be discussed is pursuing a stormwater sales tax. That would actually be able to be bonded, so we would be able to do some of those projects using that new revenue thread for bonding capacity. Another thing would be additional grant funding. The staff has been actively pursuing many grant funds, new partnerships. As Clay County continues to grow, there might be new partnership opportunities for shared services, so that perhaps we're looking at partnering with Gladstone or Liberty to kind of pool our resources to get a lower purchase price for certain items. Those are some of the things that we at the staff level are looking at. Analyze recovery options for our permits and inspections. We here at the staff level, we can't recall the last time what we charge for permits and inspections has been audited to see if we are recovering those costs for those services. Again, we've talked about the fact that people are more expensive, the vehicles that they're driving in are more expensive, yet we're still charging this rate. Should we take a look at what we are charging for permits and fees to see if they should be analyzed and brought forward for your consideration on adjusting them to make sure they're recapturing some of the costs it takes for us to do those. So those are kind of some of the opportunities that we're considering at the staff level. Again, we're kind of going through a whole lot. We're dumping a lot of information onto you, but what we'd like to do is kind of set up perhaps some ongoing conversations around these. Future considerations, we've kind of talked about the fact that we've ordered up 5 studies. We are not anticipating that those studies will come with really great news. We're really kind of looking for 10 years' worth of homework, 10 years' worth of where should the city invest in the future? And not only should you be investing in replacing it as is, should you be considering future sizing that particular investment, specifically in stormwater? We know that the storm patterns are changing. We're not anticipating that if we were to design our stormwater system, it probably wouldn't look the way it looks right now. What should it look so that when the investments you are making at this point in time, when you hand the keys over to the next generation, you maybe have handed it off in a better position than what you received it as. So those are some of the things that we'll be looking at through those studies to really be able to make wise investments over the next 10 years. Upcoming renewals, there are a couple of upcoming renewals over the next couple of years, including the community center and the city's fiber network. As those come through, right now, a lot of those are being supplemented by the gaming fund. Is there an opportunity to maybe enter those negotiations with some different considerations in mind? I talked about, or we kind of talked about, for at least stormwater, when we get these reports in, do we bond? I'm not sure I would recommend it right now with the interest rates where they are. However, that's an industry that kind of waxes and wanes. Would it make sense for the city to consider debt issuance? The city has in the past done that. It has been several years. But again, if we are looking at 10 years worth of capital investment, does it make sense to stormwater saying it's needing an investment over here, water is needing an investment over here? Do we do all of those investments once so that we're not disturbing that particular area? We're doing it all at once, and we're doing it through debt financing. That might be something that we discuss as we move forward. I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but adaptive reuse. We've got a lot of new businesses kind of moving into legacy areas. Oftentimes, people think just because an area is zoned for a specific function that the infrastructure on top and the infrastructure underneath can support that new use. Oftentimes, it cannot. So one of the things that the city may want to consider is implementing an impact fee to have the developer help shoulder that infrastructure upgrade needed to make their development successful. That could be, above grade items, traffic impact, pedestrian safety. Maybe it's in an area that doesn't have a whole lot of pedestrian traffic, but their development might incur that. We might want to take a look at that. And again, underground. Do we have the stormwater and wastewater and sewer to be able to support that? Maybe that building only had 3 or 4 restrooms in it. Now you're putting showers, washing machines, dishwashers into a facility, and the underground utilities are not at a place to support that. So again, those are kind of some of the considerations. Other cities do utilize that to help kind of cost share some of the investments that are needed to upgrade the infrastructure to support that style of development. Speaking of development, updating the economic development policy. That policy was drafted in 2018. I'm unsure that you would have written it today the way you wrote it in 2018. So maybe it's time that we kind of schedule a work session to have a conversation of what is in that policy and what we would like that policy to look like moving forward. I mentioned before, growing communities have growing needs. It's exciting. North Kansas City is going to be home to a whole lot of new people over the next 2 years. And again, the calls for service. I'm not sure how many of you had the opportunity to take a look at the mayor's State of the City address, but we are seeing calls for services on the rise, specifically in the fire department. It would not surprise me if in the next couple of years we're talking about adding staff to ensure that we have enough staff to respond safely to our new demands. And again, those are kind of exciting things to be able to talk about. We are a dynamically growing community. However, this is kind of some of the reason we wanted you to think really long-term about how we are investing and how we are poisoning ourselves to be as successful as possible as we continue to grow. So with that, I'll stop talking, and you guys can ask any question that you would like.
Now, I would note on the economic development incentive policy that's not going to be a May, that will be a one we actually do coming up. Probably
I-
not too long.
I forgot, I was supposed to hand it over to Nick,
Oh,
sorry.
to Nick. No, so the groundwork's already being laid for that, so that conversation will be coming up once the get in a better place on the framework for that.
Well,
Nick, go ahead,
yes,
finish up here.
I mean, just kind of a quick recap on what we've talked about. So one of the things on the fund balance side, we will be coming to you to adopt fund balance policy for each of our main operating funds. And that, brings transparency, also brings you more into that conversation, makes it a part of the budget conversation, how we are maintaining those within the city. Capital policy, that is going to be something that, again, we will come to you, and I'm hoping before the next budget cycle, that will really, give us those concrete steps on when do we do bonding versus pay-as-you-go financing? Is it when the gaming fund hits a certain fund balance percentage? Thinking about those proactively makes the decision that much easier when and if we need to do those things. We will continue to examine all the revenue options that we have, looking at our fee manual, and making sure that we're charging the correct rates for things. And then I think the big thing that we're all kind of excited about is just incorporating this into our budget and strategic planning going forward. So, internally, we will be meeting on this several times throughout the year. We'll be coming to you before the budget process and really making that more of an annual cycle where we talk about the strategic plan, look at where we're at currently, and then when we get to the budget, we've already had a lot of these conversations with you. So we're excited about the next steps.
All right, Councilmember Saper looks ready to go here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I really like the idea and this prospect of looking at the costs of development and who's bearing them. That's something we've never done before, as to my knowledge, and that's a critical item. Everybody talks about development, but we don't necessarily talk about the costs in terms of city services required and other factors that go into that. Sometimes development is great. Other times, development can cost more than it's worth. And we need to look at that. I'm glad you're doing that.
All right, further comments? All right, is this the last slide? You got more? That is the last slide. Oh, thank you. Zach is applauding for you there. Thank you. No other council comments, discussions? Definitely a lot of things to digest there.
I mean,
Councilmember Cole.
yeah, I'm a big fan of the impact fee. I think that's long overdue to just recognize. I mean, there's a 2030 commitment out there for like a lot of architectural firms to create net zero building by 2030 and carbon net neutral building. So I would love to see us head down that avenue. I would also love to see us incorporate more solar and reusable, sustainable factors for our city buildings, things like that we can actually control and kind of own ourselves. So I'd love to see us head that direction as well for saving and kind of for the future of the city. And I forgot the other thing. Oh, and of course, I'm a big fan of the tax. Nobody likes to talk tax increases, but for the parks, I think it's a great move. I think we all kind of feel that way, but of course, we're like weighing out what that looks like and things like that. So I'm yay.
Thank you. Further comments? If none, then there we go. I look forward to hearing more about all these individual aspects that you mentioned this evening, and we will do something similar again soon. Thank you. We are adjourned.